Good morning and welcome. We're excited for today's session. My name is Rachel Browner. I am the program coordinator for OneOp, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's session on creating accessible youth development programs in military communities of this year's Military Family Readiness Academy. The Academy is an annual event bringing together military family service providers from multiple disciplines to address a topic important to the military family readiness system. And so this year, we've brought together experts and professionals like yourselves to address key challenges facing military youth well-being. And over these course of 6 weeks, we've continued to deliver a series of professional development opportunities like the one you're on today. But in case you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to give you a brief tour of our webinar platform so you can find your way around. Hopefully, you're currently able to view the slides that we're sharing. If you're unable to see them, or if you have any other difficulties, please email us at contact@oneop.org for tech support. And as many of you have already done so already, we look forward to having you join us in that chat pod for conversations and questions. Go ahead and embed that chat pod if you haven't already done so, so you don't miss any links or conversations by simply placing your cursor over the shared slides. From there, you're going to see a toolbar pop up across the bottom of your screen, and just go ahead and click on that chat bubble icon. But when typing any questions or comments, please make sure to select the everyone from that response options drop-down menu so everyone's able to view them on that chat pod. So again, if you haven't already done so, let us know where you're joining us from. It's been fun to get to see folks that are on today from all over, whether you're from the East Coast or West Coast on an installation or with the particular organization that you're representing. Let us know where you're joining us from. It just makes this platform a little bit more personable since we can't see or hear you. All right. Note that the slides and resources are available for download on the event page for today's session. So we're going to be covering continuing education option and information at the end of the webinar. So please stay tuned. We have lots of CE offerings. So if you're interested, stay tuned at the very end for CE credits or a certificate of attendance information. All right. Thank you for joining us as we continue our partnership with the Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to expand the readiness, knowledge, and networks for the professionals supporting our military service members and their families. The views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the official policy of the Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the U.S. government, or OneOp, and the mention of any entity or product is for informational purposes only. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenters that are on for today. Starting us off with presenting is going to be Miss Erin Fogarty. Miss Fogarty has been a certified therapeutic recreation specialist for 20 years with a background in clinical, community, and system level roles. Ms. Fogarty has held professional positions including recreational therapy, wellness program manager, community alignment coordinator, supporting individuals of all ages with chronic conditions and disabilities to enhance their health, community participation, and quality of life. In her current role as the Disability Community Coordinator for the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, which is in partnership with the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, Ms. Fogarty leads regional and statewide initiatives to improve community access and build partnerships that support the health and well-being of people with developmental disabilities. She provides education and training to agency staff, community partners, youth development professionals on strategies to create accessible recreation to promote meaningful participation of people with disabilities. She's passionate about improving health outcomes, expanding access for recreation for all. And she's also a parent of two school-age children with developmental disabilities. So she brings that professional experience and personal insight to her work. I'm also excited to have Dr. Darlene Locke on as well presenting. Dr. Locke is an associate professor and extension specialist at Texas A&M University within the Agricultural Leadership Education and Communication Department, where she specializes in applied youth development. Dr. Locke's teaching and research focuses on youth development and professional development for youth practitioners. She has over 30 years working with youth and adult audiences, striving to create inclusive environments that benefit everyone. 11 of those years, she served as director of the Texas 4-H Conference Center and facilitated youth and educational programs. And since 2015, she's generated over $1 million in grants and user fees to support extension youth development programs. And finally, we are excited to have Lieutenant Colonel Joetta Khan. Um, Colonel Khan is a registered dietitian who holds a PhD in public health from Rutgers, an MPH in global health from New York Medical College, and a BS in nutrition and dietetics from the University of Mexico. Colonel Khan's completed her internship at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and she served in various leadership and academic roles, including at Walter Reed, Tripler Army Medical Center, and Keller Army Community Hospital, and she's been deployed to Iraq. Currently, Lieutenant Colonel Khan leads a research initiatives that support virtual clinics at Keller Army Community Hospital and contributes to curriculum development and military nutrition research. Her expertise includes clinical nutrition operations, performance nutrition, public health nutrition, and professional education. She's authored numerous publications and presentations. Her awards include Defense Meritus Service Medal, multiple Meritus, Service and Achievement Medals and badges. And Colonel Khan and her family currently live in Chester, New Jersey, where her husband, Lieutenant Colonel Salim Khan, and their two daughters. She's going to share her perspectives as both a healthcare provider and a parent of a child with special healthcare needs. Before we go ahead and turn over the presenter reins to Miss Erin Fogarty, I'd like to go ahead and briefly provide some learning objectives for today's presentation. We're going to be focusing today on fostering positive outcomes for youth development programs, and we're going to explore how camps, 4-H, and military youth services can support the well-being and growth of all young people, including those with disabilities. So throughout today's webinar, we're going to highlight some best practices for accommodating youth with disabilities, share some practical strategies for creating accessible and supportive environments where every young person can thrive. And so we're going to explore, we're going to identify strategies in bridging gaps to accommodations, explore some research and evidence-based practices. We're going to recognize some disability etiquette and background information to better support youth and provide some resources and examples for inclusive youth programs in cooperative extension and military connected settings. If you have any questions throughout today's presentation, feel free to pop in those questions in that chat, or just if you want to provide some comments, feel free to do so. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass over the presenter reins to Miss Erin Fogarty.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And good morning to everyone. We are really excited that you have joined us for this discussion on creating accessible youth development programs. Thank you so much for being here. So we wanted to begin by providing some background information for you on disability. And as you can see here, per the CDC's definition, disability is comprised of 3 dimensions. So a person has an impairment that leads to limitations in activity on a personal level, and then it also restricts how they participate in the world around them. So there are both visible and invisible disabilities. A medical condition like a traumatic brain injury that was acquired during the adolescent years could be considered a disability, as well as mental health conditions that impact the person. So essentially, disability really does affect all of us or someone that we care about, and it is a natural part of the human experience. So looking at some of these statistics, you can see here that again, these statistics reiterate what I just shared. So 41% of our military spouses reported that a family member has a special medical and or educational need. So that is a high percentage. And then 1 in 6 or 17% of children in the US have a developmental disability. And so, based on these statistics, it's really important to know that there are currently youth with disabilities that are participating in youth development programs, whether those disabilities are identified or not. And there will continue to be many youth with disabilities that want to engage in your programs. So, as we look to create accessible youth development programs, what language should we use when we communicate with our youth about their disability? And there essentially are two different ways to communicate. People first language is an objective way of acknowledging, communicating, and reporting on disabilities. So it really puts that person first and then the disability second. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, there's what's called identity first language. So this component is really something where it embraces the disability as that significant component of the person's identity. And essentially, we just want to follow the person's lead as to how they communicate about their disability and use that type of language that they do. And if we're uncertain, then people first language is typically the best language to use. Okay, so this morning we would love to hear from you and to get some of your ideas and thoughts around accessibility within recreation and youth development programs. So, if you would be so kind, we would really like to hear your thoughts on how you feel that shared participation in recreation and youth development programs benefit both our youth that have disabilities and our youth that don't have disabilities. So if you would please share some information in the chat and we'll kind of discuss from there. Okay, so wonderful. I'm already seeing some providing different perspective, learning from one another, builds empathy and understanding. It's important to learn about others, building partnerships between youth. So acceptance, learning to be in community with people who are different from you, developing some of those skills. So, developing those communication skills, belonging in friendships. I see a lot of friendships, a lot of community, reducing emotional distress from isolation. Thank you all for participating. Our youth with disabilities feel included and without disabilities learn together, providing an opportunity for those with and without disabilities to be together. Okay, this is wonderful. I love this information. And thank you again for giving us your perspective on the work that you've done and potentially how you've seen youth both with and without disabilities benefit. So, we are now going to talk about what the literature says about when we have youth with and without disabilities participate in recreation and youth development programs together. And you won't be surprised in that a lot of what was just shared in the chat and what you already know to be true has been researched and found in the literature as well. So, I saw that you all talked about the development of friendship. So that is a benefit for both youth with and without disabilities when they participate together. Increasing in the self-image or improvement in self-concept. Those mirror each other. So those are benefits for all our youth when they participate together. And then also within what you shared, feeling part of a community for our youth with disabilities, recreation and youth programs offer that gateway into feeling part of that community and reducing some social isolation, like was mentioned. And then for people without disabilities. You are 100% right. I saw a number of responses that was shared with increasing that capacity for compassion, understanding differences, and a greater peer acceptance as well. So you already you already know the literature and you already know your stuff, I can tell. Thank you all for sharing again. So that is our why. That is why should we do this work? Why should we include youth with disabilities in our programs? But now we want to talk about the how. So, how do we bridge that gap so youth with disabilities can participate in recreation and youth development programs? Youth with disabilities can be successful in recreational and educational activities when provided with appropriate accommodations and supports. And when working with youth with disabilities, it is important to know their unique skills and abilities in each of the five domains of functioning. So that's physical, sensory, communication, intellectual, and social emotional. And then it's also helpful for you to know about their goals for participation. So, for example, one youth's goal might be to participate in an activity to make friends and have social connection, while another person's goal might be to be able to learn a new skill or a new sport or activity. And then once you have a picture of the participant's strengths, abilities, and skills, you can then think about the activity demands and skills that are needed for successful participation. And here is typically where you find that gap between the participant skills and abilities and those required for participation. And then through accommodations, participant and family input, providing supports like positive behavioral supports, staff training, you can bridge that gap for a youth with a disability to participate in your program. So we talked about accommodations, but it would be helpful to find just really what that word means. So accommodations are changes to how a person learns or participates. It doesn't change what they learn, but it changes how they learn. And it's a way to support their individual and unique learning style. And we'll talk a little bit more about some specific examples in the five activity domains, but these are some general examples of accommodations. So, as we talk about the different functional abilities and activity domains, the slides that follow will include both examples of accommodations as well as some disability etiquette for the various areas of functioning, because really both are helpful in creating accessible programs. So, physical accommodations, they're really often those that may be most familiar because they're typically the easiest to see. So, accommodations like ensuring the location is accessible for people that use wheelchairs or have other physical disabilities, this may be somewhat familiar to you. But one less familiar accommodation could also be to use lighter weight objects or different size objects for those that have physical disabilities. So, for example, like a lighter weight or larger size ball for youth that might have issues with upper extremity strength or grip. So the first picture here on the left-hand side, that looks like scissors, and that's in fact what they are. They're called loop scissors. This is an example of a adapted equipment, which can be an accommodation. So loop scissors, they reduce the tension on hands and assist youth that have difficulty with cutting due to fine motor difficulties. And then the second picture, this is just an example of multiple types and sizes and even textures of balls that can be used to accommodate youth with those grip or fine motor difficulties. And then thinking about sensory accommodations. So our youth that have disabilities often process sensory information different than our youth that don't have disabilities. And Of course, when you're in a camp, an after school, a recreation program, there's lots of noise and activity, which is really good because that means fun is going on. But that often comes along with some of those sensory processing difficulties. It can make it even more difficult for a youth to filter the information that they need to pay attention to. And at times, a youth could become overwhelmed by some of the noise or activity around them, even if they're having fun. And so, designating a quiet or safe space that a youth can use and equipping that area with sensory items, fidgets, headphones, this is one potential accommodation that can be helpful for our kiddos that have sensory processing difficulties. And so you'll see here on the left-hand side, these are just an example from Amazon of different types of fidgets that can be helpful. Some of them are actually some of my kiddos' favorite fidgets that they use to either help pay attention or to help just kind of decompress. And then the other two pictures are ways to create a low cost or quiet, safe space for youth that need to just take a break potentially from an activity, have some time to regroup, and then can rejoin. And so moving on to the next area of accommodations. When we look at youth that have difficulty with communication, a helpful accommodation can be to use alternate communication strategies, like explaining directions in multiple ways in addition to explaining them verbally. So, writing down words, demonstrating the directions physically, or having printed pictures can be an accommodation that can be supportive. So, this picture here is an example of a visual schedule that communicates to youth who are visual learners what to expect for the day or that activity. And then, in addition, when we think about communication challenges, one of the things that is helpful and also can truly be an accommodation is to be patient. So, I know we try to be patient with all our youth in our programs. Same thing with my kiddos, and I have to remember to give myself and allow them some extra time to communicate when what they've heard and respond back to me. So, in the best of circumstances, without the extra stimulation of a fun youth development activity, youth with disabilities will often need that extra processing time to respond to a request. So that is true potentially even when there is no intellectual disability present. And so then in the context of a new environment where they have competing demands for attention and lots of sensory input, they can need even additional time for communication. So that patience is key. And then looking at our next domain, so around intellectual accommodations, really thinking about breaking down that activity into smaller steps will help our youth with an intellectual disability or attention difficulties to be able to participate in that activity more successfully. And as an example here, pictorial information, it doesn't always have to include just pictures like we showed with the visual schedule. Highlighting key phrases in a sentence to draw attention to important words or concepts in a lesson plan or printed rules, for example, can be accommodation that can be supportive. And really, this accommodation is helpful to let all youth know what is key and what is important to pay attention to. And then, in addition, utilizing peers in the program to be a support or buddy when assistance is needed allows the youth to have someone other than an adult to ask for help. And then, this accommodation can also help to promote their social skills, build relationships with peers, and create that belonging that we know is so important and is such a meaningful benefit for our youth with and without disabilities. And then lastly, in the last domain, our social emotional accommodations. It is helpful to prepare all youth for activities and transitions. They'll know what's happening in an activity, what's expected of them. But for our youth with disabilities and those that have social emotional challenges, this is something that is really key. So, preparing that youth often helps to reduce anxiety so they can participate with better cooperation and more independence. And then, whenever possible, give youth a choice. So, this is not just something that is for our kiddos with disabilities, but that choice promotes autonomy, it encourages decision making, and some of the ideas for choice can be potentially in materials used, a choice in their reward, or potentially a choice in location. And then just lastly, as we come to this last area of functioning, I've mentioned it a few times, but you'll notice that some of these accommodations have been listed on multiple slides, meaning they can work for youth that need support in different functioning areas. And one thing I really would like to leave with you is that often what we call accommodations for youth with disabilities is really good practice for all youth, regardless if they have a disability or not. And so, but it is important to note that by providing these accommodations, they are really one key part of bridging that gap to help our youth with disabilities successfully participate with their peers. So I want to share just a couple resources that might be helpful. So that way, if you have a desire to dive in a little more deeply into creating accessible youth development programs, you will have something to take away with you. So Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension has created a guide that goes a little bit more in depth into approaches to create some of those accessible recreation and camp programming. There are some example activities in the guide with considerations for youth with disabilities and sample accommodations. And then there's also links to resources from an amazing array of other types of organizations that have also done this work. And then lastly, McMaster University and CanChild, an organization called CanChild, has created a tip sheet for families to begin the discussion with providers about the supports and accommodations that might be needed for successful participation, really in any type of organized group activity. Um, it is really helpful that it starts with communicating goals for participation. So, what are the youth's goals and why do they want to participate in this activity, which can be shared? We talked about goals being, part of the need of to begin that discussion. And then also the form, it doesn't ask for a medical condition or diagnosis. So if the family or the youth chooses not to share their diagnosis, they can still utilize this to be able to share their needs and supports. And then on the second page of the guide, or on the second page, excuse me, of the tip sheet, it lists ways that the instructor can help a youth successfully participate in the activity. So there are check boxes that provide different examples of ways that they might be able to be supportive, and those can turn into accommodations. And this can help parents discuss those potential accommodations with youth development professionals, as well as a way to be able to show those professionals that accommodations really can be achievable. I share this, it's just because it's something I've used both personally and professionally, and was a really key um, tool for me to be able to share that information about my child or have someone that I was working with, and to begin that conversation to promote that um, successful, accessible programming. Okay, so now I will turn the mic over to Dr. Darlene Locke, who will talk some more about some of the practical applications of what we just shared.
Okay, thanks, Erin. And thank you all for being on today. We'll get transition here. Should be going. There we go. Good deal. All right, so I'm here to share with you, as Erin said, some practical applications that we were able to utilize with a camp program at our 4-H center. In Texas. This all came from an effort nationally called Building Community Inclusion way back in 2004, when we started thinking about the benefits that both youth with and without disabilities do receive, as Erin just shared, in an actual camp sort of setting. So throughout this, as I talk about camp, just understand or realize that this can easily be transferred to any type of program, but the photos that I'll share and the activities were specific to that particular camp called Mission Possible. And our goal there was to um, bring together youth with and without disabilities in a traditional camp environment. And as we did that, we always rely back on those 8 essential elements that we know in youth development are important to include. And so those are listed here for you. Um, and, they're just kind of the foundational um, kind of concepts that we try to include in all of our programming so that youth get the greatest benefit. Um, one of the we won't go over all 8 of those, but I just want to point out a few of those because of the lack of time today. But just a few of those and how we actually applied them in the camp environment. And so one of the very most underlying principles to bringing youth together is to have physical and psychological safety. And so, again, some of those easy physical things that we addressed would be eliminating those barriers for all youth to participate. So, things like making sure that there was access into the buildings, access to the different areas within the camp so that all youth would have complete ability to participate. One of the things we did for those dormitories where we knew there would be youth with various disabilities, we ensured that even our handles were more easy for them to use. And so it did require some physical accommodations on our part as far as the facility, but we also learned that that benefited everyone. And so again, another concept are things that we specifically worked with our camp staff and our volunteer staff is that one of the greatest barriers we present are those attitudes and stereotypes that we might hold before actually interacting with persons with disabilities. And so those stereotypes are everywhere and they can impact how we feel or how we think about persons with disabilities. And so even thinking whether or not a child could participate in a traditional camp environment is something that we wanted to make sure that our volunteers and staff felt comfortable with that and that yes, indeed, these children had a place at camp. Erin's already talked about the language and the people first and the identity first aspect of that. Adaptation, we learned, was definitely the key to providing that inclusive atmosphere for all youth to participate. And so where we have games and activities that we typically use in the camp environment, it did take some modification and some thinking ahead to know how could this activity be conducted with an inclusive group of young people. And so whereas in this activity that's on the screen requires the tennis ball to go into a hole in the tarp in a certain order, with youth participating of varying abilities, we found that modifying the tarp to have larger holes, eliminating the idea that it had to be done in a certain order, those kind of slight modifications to an activity create something that all of the youth could be successful. And so in our actual use of this activity during Mission Possible, you can see that the tennis ball there, and then the hole in the tarp is, the hole is very much larger than what the tennis ball requires. Had that activity been done in another environment, that hole in the tarp would be much smaller. So anyway, just thinking ahead to the abilities that the youth will have, and then providing some slight accommodations to activities so that they can participate. I think Aaron pointed this out too, is that opportunity for youth to belong is critically important for every young person, for every adult. And so but that depends. It differs with every person that you'll be working with. And so it's important, first and foremost, to get to know the young person and what they are bringing, what their strengths and abilities are. For our camp, we facilitated that by actually having conversation with the parent or the guardian before the youth arrived at camp to get an understanding of what their abilities are, what challenges do they have, and what would that look like in this very physical outdoor and sometimes indoor environment. And so again, it just goes back to that idea that understanding the individual and what they're bringing to your program or your activity is critically important because it's going to vary with each individual. Continuing on with belonging, this was kind of a teachable moment for us. We started this camp in 2005, and again, we are bringing in youth with disabilities and youth without disabilities, and having like a mentoring process among peers, peer age youth. And when we first did the camp, in the upper left photo there, you see the three boys. And we felt we had two different colors of the same shirt. And we were using that to help us maybe identify the youth with disabilities. And after we did it, just even the first year, we realized that that created an actual barrier, and it created a sense of, well, that's this group and that's this group. And so from the second year on, just again, a kind of a subtle thing, but it can have a big impact on a young person. We started having all of the t-shirts be of the same color, all the same design, so that those youth with disabilities did not feel like they were different. And so again, it all goes to that sense of belonging and helping all of the youth feel like they are important in this group. Another aspect of the camp that we had each summer is while our youth participants in the Mission Possible setting, where we had youth with and without disabilities specifically there to learn from one another, that was a small group. We had about 30 maximum at any time in that Mission Possible group. But we were conducting that camp at the 4-H Center at the same time that our traditional county camp was happening, where there was probably over 200 kids there for a traditional residential camp program. And so we seized that opportunity to help educate all of the youth and help them to overcome those fears that often we have when approaching someone with a disability. And so just a simple exercise that we did at the county camp environment of 200 or more kids is we brought in one of our teams from Mission Possible, which was a young person with Down syndrome and his two siblings. And they did a little program that they actually do in their own community to educate people about their sibling with Down syndrome. And so what this consisted of is something that we called Just Like Me. And so the two siblings talked about Gabe, who is the young man in the green cap here, they talked about Gabe and the things that he likes and the things that he does, and the fact that he's an excellent bowler and he beats his parents at bowling and he does not use the little bumper thingies, that he has fear of lightning and thunder, and that he goes to prom with his girlfriend. And then, oh, by the way, Gabe also has Down syndrome. So they really tried to help the young people in the county camp environment realize that, yes, Gabe has a disability, but Gabe is so much more than that. And so, again, it's that idea that oftentimes we're just afraid. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to act. We don't know how to approach individuals with disabilities. And when we can help to educate people, that just helps break those stereotypes down. Okay, moving on, again, just trying to share with you some ways that we facilitated this camp in an inclusive setting. Um, One of the things that we were very aware of is that we had to have a plan, but there also had to be flexibility built into that plan. And because our youth with disabilities, we had spaces for them, those safe spaces where when they were tired or they were um, not wanting to participate in a particular activity that was scheduled, we had alternative activities for them to be able to choose to participate in. We we utilize those concepts of simplifying communication. Our agenda for this camp was on a big poster board, and it was a visual and written sort of schedule. And so we did try to recognize that very often young people with disabilities have that need to know what's next, what's next, what's next. And so by providing those schedules in a very visual way, we feel like that really helped them to know what was coming up, to know what activity and what it was going to require. And then it also allowed them to work with their peer mentor ahead of time to kind of prepare for that activity. And so, again, having a schedule, but having that flexibility to um, to just kind of punt and do what you needed to do to make it a successful activity for the participant. And a lot of that we worked with our peer mentors in their training before camp. So they would come in a couple of days before camp, and we would go through some activities with them to better understand their role of working with these young people and some of the disabilities that they would be bringing into the camp environment, but also the abilities and the unique aspects of their personality that would be coming into camp. Um, the supportive relationships are probably one of the 8 most essential elements. And in this environment of youth with and without disabilities, we wanted the young people on both to know that not only were they there for each other, but we had adults there also that would help them in navigating whatever that little challenge might be. And so when working in an inclusive environment like this, it's really important, I think, that a relationship develops between the youth, but then also that those adults are there to also provide those kind of boundaries, also to provide guidance, and then also just to kind of step in when necessary. But where possible, allow the youth to figure things out and to independently, but with help, navigate through the camp experience or the program experience. So it's really important that staff working with the inclusive environment are aware of what they should be doing and how they should be working with the youth in the program. One thing that we also stressed with our youth and our staff are ideas of personal space and making sure that the young people on either side did not feel like their personal space was being violated. And so we wanted to just, talk about that and what does that mean and what does that look like? Some of the activities that we might play or engage in might require holding hands with someone. And oftentimes that's not a comfortable thing depending on a youth and their social development. And so we just want to be aware of that and manage it on an individual basis. And so then, and make adjustments where necessary. We also talk with our group about blindfolds and not blindfolding a person without permission. And so, because we don't know what is in that person's history. And so a lot of games and activities might require the use of a blindfold. And so, let's make sure that everyone is agreeable to that. Um, the key thing in all of this is we want that young people have the opportunity to build skills, whatever that skill is. So it might be skills, as Erin mentioned, just social, learning to be able to talk more with other people, whether it's another youth or an adult. Their skills, they could be building those skills in archery or swimming or whatever. But when we created the camp, we wanted it to have some, lots of fun and games, but also an opportunity for young people of all abilities to move from one place in their skills to advance into, a higher level of skills. And as we talked about earlier in the comments that you all provided in the chat, it is definitely skill building on both sides. Our young people without disabilities who were there serving as peer mentors, it was an awareness, first and foremost, for them. But then it was also that development of empathy and understanding, not feeling sorry, but understanding how the challenges that these kids have every day, but then also the challenges that we as society place on them. And so it will always be an opportunity for persons without disabilities to learn that, to get a better understanding of what it is, the challenges that they would have daily as they kind of navigate different aspects. So again, in our camp, the young people on the right here, they got to be in the kitchen working alongside the staff, just as every other youth has that opportunity. And so the key thing is providing opportunity, giving them the chance to do these things. And I think I have just a minute more left, but the one thing I would want to finish with is something that I learned just this summer from one of our county extension agents who traditionally they've had a show in the ring sort of thing, a day in the ring, which is a activity where young people with disabilities get to come exhibit a livestock animal in the show ring for one day. Anyway, after this has happened many times in their county, the families of children with disabilities said, we want our kids in 4-H. We want to form a club for our kids. And this county agent, in my opinion, really stepped up and said, no, no, I don't want you forming a club for your kids with disabilities. He says, I want your kids to join clubs already in place close to their community. And then we can do projects for those kids because we know they might have to require a lot of modification. He says, but I want your kids to be in our regular 4-H clubs. And so I will leave you with that, is that we want to work towards an inclusive environment where both youth with and without disabilities feel that connection and that belonging in any setting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Khan, and she's going to share her perspective. It takes a minute for the transition, so there we go.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm so honored to be able to join this panel. I feel like every time I've listened to them speak, I've learned so much about acceptable and changes and accommodations for youth programs. But I would like to start off with a timeline of sorts. So both my husband and I have been serving in the Army for over 20 years. We have a long history of service. For my husband, he started serving in 1998. He enlisted and then later commissioned. We actually met in 2000, and then he commissioned me into the Army in 2004 to be an Army dietitian. After we were married, we did a series of deployments. So between the two of us, we have four. He has three of those. I have one. Notably, our 2010 to 2011 deployments did overlap. So we did not see each other during that time period for about 22 months. So we thought we had mastered it all. We were high achievers, both really good at our jobs, but we thought something was missing. So in 2013, we had our older daughter, Mina. She was born at Triple Army Medical Center. She was neurotypical. I did my 6 weeks maternity leave because that's what was authorized at the time. And then she went into the Child Development Center, and we said she gained a whole bunch of aunties. It was a fantastic experience. She pretty much met all of her milestones. My husband went on a subsequent deployment number 4. I pursued my PhD at Rutgers in public health, and we continued to take these assignments. And then in 2019, we experienced what we thought was a normal pregnancy, to be surprised with a in delivery room diagnosis of Down syndrome for our daughter, Liv. I do want to highlight the fantastic team at Walter Reed at the time, from the pediatrician, the young captain pediatrician that delivered the message that they suspected Down syndrome, to the social worker who I was not her patient, but who came by and told me about early intervention. I will forever be grateful for the method in which they delivered that news. And then I want to fast forward from here, and I want to highlight that picture of the pumpkin patch. So that picture, Liv was born in February of 2019. That picture was taken in November of 2019. And I highlight this picture because Liv is 9 months old in this picture. And this is the first time as a parent I felt like things were going to be okay. So I just want to highlight that it can take 9 months for some families to feel okay with a diagnosis. It can take a shorter amount of time, or it can take a significant longer amount of time. I honestly felt that day in the delivery room that my career was over. And so I highlight this picture. It's on my coffee cup in my office to remind me that my career was not over in that delivery room, but it took 9 months for me to find my new path. Since my daughter Liv was born, we have advanced in our careers. Both my husband and I have been promoted. The picture in the upper left there is at my lieutenant colonel promotion. I was actually a major when Liv was born. We have relocated. So we moved to San Antonio in 2022 and then relocated here to New Jersey, New York in 2024. I do want to highlight that each time that we relocate, it does take us about 6 months to reestablish care, daycare, to find camps. So we're 1 year into this new assignment, and I finally feel like we're getting our feet under us in terms of what we need for our daughter. I hopefully it'll switch slides here. I do want to highlight that although in the military, we are, we may be providers, we may be soldiers. We've dealt with so many things in our careers. We may be overachievers, we may be super performers, we may have deployed, we may have lost friends in combat, we may have been to combat ourselves. But in all of that, I really think there's nothing in our career path that actually prepares us to be a parent of a special need child. And so it, my purpose in sharing this slide with you is because when that diagnosis is provided, there's a mourning period that many parents probably experience. And for some, it's shorter. For my husband, it lasted a couple of months, and he immediately, kicked in and said, I just want her to be okay. I don't want people to be mean to her. Let's do what we can type thing. For me, it took 9 months. For other parents, it may take longer. And I also want to highlight that that mourning period and that adjustment period, it doesn't start until they receive the diagnosis. So if a child is diagnosed later in life, remember that mourning period starts at that diagnosis for those parents. So they are mourning what they thought that child was or would be. And with that comes a whole slew of fears or uncertainty. So one of the fears that I have every time we move or every time I introduce my daughter to a new school or a new program is the fear of the unknown. So in this graphic, I highlight me at the top, and then I highlight the programs, or at least my experience with the different programs that we've been able to engage with. So where I may be feeling like, how will this program care for my child? Many times the program is thinking, we've never had someone in the program with this disability. What do they need? What can they do? And so my advice here is ask and listen, both for the parent and for the program. Because if you don't ask, then you won't know. But if nobody's listening, then we can't understand each other. The second one is, will they know what she needs? My daughter has limited communication. She does use a series of approximations and signs. It's coming in, she's getting better, but I understand her. I always say I speak live, but will the program understand her? And I think what the program is asking is, what do I need to know about their needs? I want to know what their needs are, but I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to, categorize this child in a certain way. And so for this piece, I always tell others that I work with to be transparent and true. So tell them exactly how your child communicates. Ask them their questions about those communication styles, and then provide those supports or resources if you have them. I always ask, what will my child take away from the experience? Will it take away from other children? And the program is usually thinking, can this child make friends? Will this child get along with the other kids her age? How will it impact their participation? So I like to provide my input on how my child engages with other children and how other children can engage with my child. That next blue circle there, I ask, are the staff trained and can they support my child's needs? So does the program understand the need for a visual schedule for my child? Whereas this program is thinking, does my staff have all the info they need to support the child? What else do we need to know? What training do we need? What tools do we need? A lot of times I provide those. I bring those with me whenever I'm talking to a program. I schedule a meeting ahead of time. And I'm very open for those programs to ask questions. I also wonder, will they see my child as a burden, or will they see my child as I do? And maybe the program's thinking, what can we do to accommodate the child and support the program? So again, here I do a meet and greet tour. I encourage programs to do a meet and greet tour. As the parent, I always start off with who my daughter is. My daughter is a 6-year-old girl who loves all of these things. Oh, and she happens to have Down syndrome. I will never forget the first IEP meeting that I sat in at a new elementary school. And I was so focused on her medical diagnoses of, hypothyroid and her cardiac issues, that at some point along the way, when I described her, I forgot to tell them that that she has Down syndrome. And one of the teachers actually stopped me and said, "Wait, I thought we were here to talk about a child with Down syndrome." So again, the way I see my daughter and the way the program may see my daughter are two different things. And so it's really important that we meet, and they understand my child and that I share those aspects of my child with the program. When it comes to mutual benefit for both the program and my child, I wanted to highlight some opportunities where I've seen it be fantastically beneficial for both. I think the biggest thing that I've seen is when others are curious and want to understand, and they're willing to include my child. So whether that's another child asking about my child or the program asking, if they're curious and they want to understand, that helps everybody understand. When they encourage my child to belong and be part of that team or that class or that program, when they fully believe that she can participate, then she's usually included. If she's provided the same opportunity as everyone else, maybe with some additional explanation. So Dr. Locke did a fantastic job of talking about those visual schedules. My daughter needs that visual structure. She needs time to process. And so when I can communicate that to the programs and they follow that, it works wonderfully. Modifying group assignments to align with the developmental capabilities. So if a program has the capabilities of aligning their groups to ensure that that child is in the best fit. I want to highlight a summer camp that my child attended this past summer. She started off with the first and second graders because that's how they had them combined. And it worked okay, but we found that she really fit better with the 5 and 6-year-olds, the early first graders and the kindergartners. That was a better fit. The program was flexible and able to alternate her schedule to move over with that other group, and it worked fantastic for the program and for my daughter. Some examples of when it wasn't achieved, and I think these were all well intentioned, but it did not work out well. When somebody puts too much emphasis on the difference. So although well intentioned, it can create that barrier. When we say that Liv is different, Liv can't, or Liv might not be able to, then that emphasizes the difference versus saying, oh, Liv can do that too. Look, she can do it this way. Giving too many directions at once. If someone's not able to slow down, I had an opportunity to work with a teacher who said she doesn't listen. I can't get her to do anything in class. So I said, no problem. Let me come and sit in the class. I went into the class. The teacher did rapid fire directions to 6-year-olds, 5, 6 directions, and then told them to get in line. None of them got their jackets or picked up their backpacks. They all got in line. They all heard the last direction. So this wasn't something that was unique to my child. This was something unique to that individual teacher. So really slowing things down, understanding the limitations in terms of how many directions should be given at once. If staff is unable or unskilled to identify different learners or identifying when they are creating that barrier, we have all sorts of different learners, whether they have a disability or not. Children and adults learn differently. And so it's really important that we provide some education and skill building in our staff to understand those differences and incorporate that into the program. So maybe there are written instructions and visual instructions and kinesthetic instructions provided in those programs. Anytime there's been program staff unfamiliar with the comprehension level of the group of children. So if they don't understand the level at which all of those children are able to perform. Lack of equipment to modify to the level of inclusion. So some of the camps that my daughter attends have porta potties. She's very short. She needs a stool to be able to assist her in those facilities. So making sure that they understand that and that we either bring her stool with her or they provide it. Another thing that I've noticed that did not achieve the best outcome was trying to use her sister. So Liv has a sister who is 6 years older than her, who is wonderful and has learned so much about Down syndrome and abilities and modification. But sometimes they try to leverage her, and it almost became like a babysitting within the camp. And so I really try to separate them out in those groups. She doesn't mind helping, but that's not the intent for her to be that one-to-one for my child. I also want to highlight some mechanisms for overcoming challenges through advocacy. And I did see the chat pop up and somebody talked about EFMP. And I want to talk about them as a fantastic support here momentarily. But some of the big challenges are space and ratio limitations. And so I think this one is really important as a program to understand your space and ratio limitations and to understand how those change when you may have child with special needs in your program. But again, here, the challenge I've seen is they focus on that disability versus the abilities. So when I say the words Down syndrome, many times people think my child needs a one-on-one. My child does not need a one-on-one support to function in many programs. And so I think, again, focusing on the abilities versus the disabilities and really communicating those can alleviate some of those concerns for a program on those race, space, and ratio limitations. Another challenge is enrolling. Whatever the platform may be, whatever the documents may be, every time we PCS, every post is different. If I'm on a Navy post or an Air Force post or an Army post, they all want different paperwork. They all want different platforms. They all have different documents that are required. So this becomes a big challenge. And so I think just looking forward, that's one area that could definitely be improved to help our families with youth who have some of these considerations. Offering other activities if my child is unable to participate in specific activities. This was a big challenge for us this past summer. Is there were field trips to places that were very populated, that maybe would have had larger ratios, maybe were water parks. And so my concern was, one, supervision, and 2, water safety. So my child did not go on those field trips this year, and instead the program offered alternatives for other kids that weren't going on the field trips. So now she was put into a mixed age and abilities group, but they all did activities there at the camp versus going on the field trips. So that was an opportunity that we found to support, even though it was a challenge. Any kind of requirements for special permission slips and other documentation, plans, and meetings. So every time we go into a new program, we have to do an updated physical. Even if there haven't been changes, there has to be a behavioral plan put into place. And so this is a constant paperwork shuffle for many military families. And it's very time consuming, especially if you consider the amount of time it takes to get in to see those specialists. So a lot of times now I plan from PCSing at one place, I'll get them to do all the paperwork. I look it up. What do they all need at the next place? But some of the exceptional supports that we've had along the way is our exceptional family member program. I think this program got a bad rap early on, and we're still, as a service, trying to learn how to use this. So I am a huge advocate of the EFMP program. I always encourage other families to reach out to them and invite them to participate in what is going on with that child. Even when we're moving into a new childcare or camp situation through a new CDC, I invite EFMP. I want them there. I want them there as my advocate. And I may have several calls with them to ask about those programs ahead of time and get the information I need to best advocate for my child. I would also say the pediatrician, referrals, physicals, IEP input. I have leveraged electronic messaging with my daughter's pediatrician. Like I said, planning ahead, getting all the paperwork done with her current pediatrician because I know it's going to take time to establish at that new location. I also meet with program directors of these programs because I feel that they are nicely positioned to help. The public health nurse that's available to come in and also engage, especially if your child has medical needs. And so this multidisciplinary inclusion action team that we have on Army installations for children that are going in has been fantastic. But my biggest advice to family members or parents that are going to this is be prepared. I write out everything that I want to talk about. I bring in a little single page document about my daughter that talks about who she is. It has a picture of her. It humanizes her. It expresses her as a 6-year-old and what her abilities are. I share her strengths. I share her challenges. And then I open them up. I open the meeting up to ask questions. And this is where a lot of the planning comes into place for her to be as successful as possible in these programs. I would also highlight school personnel. So there are special education teachers, OTs, PTs, and even that general education teacher that can help families and programs develop goals that can be continued within those programs. And so this is a kind of, I feel like sometimes an untapped resource for helping our families to maneuver this space. Oops, let me go back one here. I also want to highlight the right accommodations. So whenever I'm meeting with my team or I'm encouraging other families, I always encourage the team approach. I never use the word I always say we or our or Liv's team. I always try to use that kind of positive messaging for any program or provider that I'm working with. I always say, I'm so glad you're on Liv's team because I want us all to be moving in the right direction. I also encourage meeting early and meeting often. So I take her in to meet with the camp counselors. We walk the camp ground. We get the schedule early. We go through the schedule. We build a visual schedule at home. We talk about riding the bus and which days she doesn't ride the bus. And again, I meet with that program director. I want them to understand that I am a partner in ensuring that my daughter can fully participate. Individual education plan. So the IEP, also known as a 504, or in some other states, other things, is really important. It is super important for our military families. If a child goes through early intervention and they're working through early intervention, they are put on an IFSP, so the family support plan. Before our children PCS, we really need to get them on that IEP if they're old enough, because that really improves that transition to other states, because every state is different. Going from Maryland to Texas, I had to learn a whole new language just to be able to complete an IEP in Texas. So making sure that our families have those documents and making sure that our providers are engaged in helping them to develop those documents is so important. But they definitely need something versus nothing, because if they go with nothing, they're starting over from scratch. And then again, early schedules, visual schedules, we do packing, and we practice packing, we practice going to those places, and those all help to ensure that my daughter has the right accommodations by the time we get to camp. So some other things to think about are system level design items. So one size doesn't fit all. Both the prior presenters talked about when you've met one person with the diagnosis, you've met that one person. So I really encourage people to ask, engage with that individual and their family. We would much rather you ask us how that person is or how they learn best than to try to guess. Because by guessing, sometimes you can guess wrong. Also, I would highlight that every child deserves early intervention, but this is a challenge for military providers. Early intervention is state-based program, and so it's really important for military providers or childcare providers to understand how we enroll our service members and their families in those programs. I was given the blessing of having the social worker who came and talked to me at 3 days old for Liv. I did that night. I went online and I filled out the early intervention paperwork. I had early intervention in my home at 3 weeks doing an evaluation, and my daughter started early intervention at 6 weeks old. So again, had that provider not told me about that, I would not have known. Also, reduce the barriers and hurdles for families that they must jump through. So if a family comes in and they have paperwork from their last location or their last duty assignment, do they really need extra paperwork? Do they need different paperwork? Is there really a requirement for that additional screening if it's in just on a different paper? So I think if we could look at maybe looking internally to our programs, or even as a Department of Defense, or looking across those things and figuring out which paperwork would work and which is most appropriate, and how we can leverage what's already being created versus having them jump through hoops. Designing education that identifies the strength of inclusion in programs while also providing realistic solutions to challenges. I think this is really where the rubber meets the road, because programs need to ensure that their program is resourced and functional. But sometimes we don't share what works well. And so making sure that we have those opportunities to share. And then engaging staff with experience. So some of the best advocates that I found for my daughter in these programs were staff that had experience with other individuals that had special needs. So maybe someone would come up and say, "Oh, I had an uncle who had Down syndrome." And I would say, "Oh, fantastic. Tell me about your uncle." And then they would tell me about their uncle. And then they just were really wonderful partners on moving through that program or that system. So again, leveraging those staff within your programs that have that experience and are engaged with those different communities can be very helpful for ensuring that the program and the staff understands some of those designs that can be implemented. So that is all I have. The biggest thing that I can leave you with here is making sure that you are focused on including the family, communicating with the family, and then seeking out that information for the family if you don't have that information yourself. Some of the biggest advocates that we've had so far in our journey with our special needs daughter have been those providers. So again, you play a vital role, whether you're a provider in a childcare or a program, summer camp, or you're a medical provider. You play a role in ensuring that our families understand the services that are out there. And I think this QR code is to an article that Rachel wrote that goes through a little bit more in detail about our family's experience with navigating EFMP and just the life of having a special need child while also serving in a dual military family. So thank you.
Colonel Khan, thank you so much for providing both your personal and professional experiences and your journey with us. At this time, I would like to open it up. If you have any questions or comments, I know there's been lots of great comments and just feedback and encouragement from participants on today. And then I also appreciate the resource sharing amongst yourselves that's happening in that chat. Shouting out to EFMP resources, talking about school liaisons are a good group to connect with as well. for educators and families, and just some additional perspectives from others that may share similar experiences. So I appreciate that. We're going to allow this time for some questions for Miss Erin Fogarty or Lieutenant Colonel Khan or any of our team here. But as you are going through and typing in your questions or comments, I do want to highlight our OneOp recently published their Power Up article or issue, the latest issue. And so it features Colonel Khan's story as well as many other provider perspectives in different arenas on military connected families. And so we want to give a shout out for that Power Up magazine that's been recently published. The QR code is here. It's also on your copy of your resources as well. And as those questions or comments are coming through, I'll continue for time's sake as we go through here. I know a lot of you are interested in receiving continuing education credit, and for today's webinar especially, there's 1.5 CE credits. For several providers, whether you're a certified disability management specialist, that's one of our new ones that's offering, a case manager. I know that there's several BCPA folks, those board certified patient advocates that are on today. We are offering CEs for you as well. Our family and consumer science group, so our extension educators that are on, we have some CEs for you as well, certified family life educators. Those of you that are public health specialists, we have certified health education as well as master certified health education specialists, and then those nutrition and wellness educators, our personal finance counselors, as well as personal family finance educators. Our human resource group, this is going to be especially important for you as we talk about individuals with disabilities, and Michigan certified teaching CEs, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and then a lot of our social workers, our licensed professional counselors, our licensed and marriage and family therapists. So several CEs from today. And then those of you that are just wanting to get a certificate of attendance, we also have that as well for you to get connected. And then I also want to, at this point, let you know that you can find our continuing education information on our event page. So if you go to our event page, you're going to be directed to a section that's in big purple bold letters, continuing ed. From there, you're going to complete a survey and then get an automatically generated certificate. So please make sure you carefully follow all steps for that. And then we also want to make note here, today's session is the second webinar of our Academy series. And so our Academy, if you've missed out on any of the previous, there's still time to get connected, find out more on our Academy website. But just to kind of recap, so the Academy itself is really looking at sharing ideas and strategies that can be implemented in your work. And we really want to be able to highlight this annual event for service providers like yourselves in multiple disciplines and areas that you're working on. And so this year's Military Family Readiness Academy really focused on youth and youth well-being. And we brought together some experts like today's session from all over different arenas that address key challenges facing military youth well-being. And so over a course of 6 weeks, and we're continuing to provide them. We have a session that's happening on September 24th. But as you can see here, we've done sessions on a panel discussion on military connected teen well-being. Just last month, we had one on fostering belonging for military connected teens. And then coming up in a couple weeks, the final session of the Academy is going to be launching leaders, preparing military connected teens for adulthood. So please, I think we have posted that link in the chat to get connected to those events for the upcoming sessions. I want to note here, I know I appreciate my colleague Bethany posting the evaluation link to obtain CE credits. An evaluation for the entire 2025 Academy is really going to be capturing your feedback for this year's events. You're going to receive continuing education certificate of attendance or completion by email from OneOp for an Academy event like today. And you'll be emailed an invitation to complete the survey. And then after you complete it, you are going to be offered a $10 Amazon gift card as a thank you for your time. So just carefully follow the directions on that link if that's something of interest to you based on the series. And then finally, I feel like I'm talking a lot here, so I apologize. I'm throwing a lot of information out at you, but some great offerings from our academy this year. And so join us for a time of reflection and networking with peers from across the academy. And we're going to take time to process some of the big ideas from the academy programming and this year's academy to help you identify at least one new idea or strategy to maybe implement in your work. So if you want time or support to implement what you've learned in these sessions, we want to reflect and connect. And so we're going to be offering a reflection that accommodates your more of schedules. So we want to select a date and time that works best for you. So please get connected with us using the link here on Practicing Connection. All right, so I want to double check as I go through here. I'm making sure I don't miss any questions. I think Bethany has posted the evaluation link. We have some links to the MFRA Reflect and Connect session. We also have a link to the Academy series where you can get connected with all of our events. All right. And just a big shout out to Miss Erin Fogarty and Colonel Khan and Dr. Locke. Erin or Colonel Khan, do y'all have any final thoughts or parting words of wisdom for the audience?
This is Colonel Khan. I would just like to highlight, I saw a couple of comments in the chat about the exceptional family member programs and whether or not they know about the diagnosis of your child. And I didn't talk about this a lot in my presentation, but I would say one of the best resources that EFMP can do is when somebody comes in and they have a child diagnosed with a particular illness or diagnosis, is do a little research and see what other support systems are available within the area that may be related to that, because I also have found that EFMP was a great resource for pointing me to other groups that could support us based on my child's needs and also my older child's needs. So they put us in contact with a lot of great sibling groups. So again, it doesn't have to be that particular diagnosis, but just kind of knowing what those resources are that are out there. And so if you are taking, a new position, just familiarizing yourself with general resources can be very helpful so that you have those to provide to families. That's all I wanted to share just from what I saw in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Khan.
And just to piggyback on Colonel Khan's sharing about resources, I will say I was a professional first before I had my children. So I was a professional recreational therapist for 20 years. Not before I had my children, but a few years before I had my children. And I wanted to share that while I knew of resources as a professional, and those resources were very important to help my personal journey, this journey, much like everything, is a learning experience. So I have learned from professionals, I have learned from parents, I have learned a lot from other parents who have walked this road before. And so I may not have been so willing to listen to parents if I hadn't had my own children with disabilities, if I would have just been the professional first. So I just want to reiterate what Colonel Khan mentioned about that partnership. Um, with all our youth development programs, there is nothing without partnership, especially for our kiddos with youth development with disabilities. the partnership is essential between the families and the providers. So I just want to thank you for all that you do in making sure that our kiddos can be included.
I see the question in the chat related to EFMP enrollment. Do you want me to take that one, Rachel?
Sure, go ahead. And also, I know we have a few folks from EFMP that might be on to also respond in the chat.
So EFMP enrollment has transitioned, and so they do have a website that is available for enrollment. There is a series of events that have to occur for enrollment, but the first step is getting them on that website to enroll and start that process. And that can also be started through the pediatricians as well. So again, I think it's worth having a conversation with those families and ensuring that the families know about the program. And like I said in my presentation, I think the program has gotten, or it used to get, a bad rap. A lot of times service members will see this as a limitation in their career versus understanding the purpose behind EFMP is to ensure that services are available for family members, whether they're children or adult family members with disabilities. So again, understanding what the program is there for. And I always like to use the example of, if your child needs a cardiologist and we put you out in the middle of nowhere, like what used to be Fort Polk, Louisiana, there may not be a cardiologist there. And so what does that mean for your family? So again, ensuring that they understand EFMP exists, because many service members may not, especially if they're very junior in their career, may not know it exists. And they may also see it as a barrier to career progression. And so ensuring that they understand what checks and balances are put in place to ensure that it's not a barrier. And I'll pause there for if anybody online from EFMP wants to highlight.
All right, thank you, Colonel Khan. All right, so we are getting close to the top of the hour. Or I say top of the hour. Our 90 minutes is almost wrapped up, but we are going to hang on for just a couple more minutes. This session is recorded, so if you want to go back and listen again to more of today's content, gather any additional resources, or if you know someone that's missed today's session, that would like to join and still receive CE credit, please send them the event page link, which we'll post it here shortly. So yes, today's session is recorded. It's going to be on demand. All of our Academy series are going to be on demand, so please get connected with our Academy for all of our sessions. To receive CE credits and gather some really great content to support military connected youth.